what the truth knows to say. Respect or venerability towards the entirety of nature and towards the creation and its laws and recommendations must determine the human being's thoughts and feelings and his or her deeds. Human beings must live in harmony with the creation, with nature, with Earth and the universe, as well as with all varieties of present existence that spring forth from these. Rivers, stones, plants, animals, lakes, seas, brooks, springs, the air and water, trees and bushes, and everything that crawls and flies here on earth are life forms with a spirit form, with very many of them being connected by psychic swinging waves. All of them are Wesenheiten that communicate with one another, all knowing about their common existence amongst one another. The consciousness and psyche of all created creations are in turn bound on a journey through time, incorporating very many bodily existences, through the innumerable forms in which life appears. In this process, death is a passage to rebirth, as well as the conversion into the other world, the world of pure spirit. This is the basis for the tightly woven and indissoluble web of all life. And in this wise, no life form strives to rise up over the others within their group and to set themselves up over the others, because each life form contains a basic goodness and not evil. After all, evil is learned and practiced as a result of inappropriate doings and Ausartung. Fundamentally, the creational laws and recommendations impose cooperation on all life forms, according to which every individual must see itself as a valueful building block of the whole in all existence of the creation. And this also applies to every political and religious, ideological and philosophical orientation, as well as to Earth and the entire universe created in accordance with the creational plan. Irrespective of what is involved, whether simple or fanatical religions and sects, stubborn nationalism, fascism, might-greedy politics, terrorism or neo-capitalism, etc., all of these directions are aberrations of the negative and evil and represent an immense threat to all peoples of Earth, in particular in the third millennium. And truly, the danger of a catastrophe befalling humanity has never been so great as today and in the future. Cynical materialism and unbridled neo-capitalism, which have now overtaken the entire world, are already leading to extremely serious damage to nature and the morality of the human beings of Earth. And this damage continues to grow in relation to the irresponsible increase in overpopulation. Things have already reached the stage when a clash of industrial nations could occur, something which can scarcely be stopped any longer and will also cast the nations of the third world into the same darkness. And if this happens, a third global conflagration will be imminent in whatever form it takes. Indeed, the human beings of Earth are well on their way to this. Therefore, it is only a question of time and rationality as in when and whether it will actually occur. However, it is once again the case that the signs are pointing to the whole thing being unavoidable. However, this third world conflagration may take various forms, such as a collapse of nature that has been desecrated and flouted by the human beings of Earth, as have the atmosphere, the water, the planet as a whole, and the animal kingdom. To put it simply, a global catastrophe. And this collapse would result in the collapse of civilization, leading in the final analysis to the total extermination of the human beings of Earth, or at least a regression to the harshest forms of primitive living. Falling back into total primitive anarchy is also possible, meaning that all the life forms still existing would only be capable of a vegetative existence full of suffering. Viewing the whole thing from this threatening perspective means no more and no less than that the human beings of Earth will sacrifice all their valueful achievements through a global catastrophe, and all because they had followed a flawed development for millennia in terms of true love, freedom, harmony, and real peace amongst all life forms. Indeed, in the present day, it is possible to see an apocalypse of this kind looming threateningly on the horizon and over the destiny of the human beings of Earth, because even long ago, the blossoming culture of the truth was destroyed globally, and evil, Goblet, and every kind of Ausartung set in its place, a thing that has happened in particular due to machinations of politicians, false laws, false penal codes, as well as religions and sections. In the Christian world, the blame for this undoubtedly lies fairly and squarely at the door of the Roman Catholic Church. Christianity, as a monotheistic and strictly autocratically oriented religion, is guilty of developing completely new, evil and ausgeartet directions of thought and forms of state after the fall of the despotic Roman Empire, which spread all over Earth, and under which all human beings are suffering in the new time. It was in particular the Roman Catholic Church that inherited the practices of the inhuman Roman Imperium, establishing an evil, consciousness-conditioned tyranny in the place of the former Roman military tyranny, which reached its accumulation in the Inquisition, but has continued uninterrupted since then, even if in a reduced form. Christianity in general, and its numerous sects, imposed a vast narrow-mindedness by dictating monotheism, a philosophy which hatefully excludes anyone who thinks and believes otherwise. Within the whole of Christianity and its sects, as well as in all other religions and their sects, absolute servitude reigns with regard to the obligation on believing the fallacious religious and sectarian teachings. Therefore, no consciousness-based liberty is tolerated, but is instead condemned and dealt with as an outrage and heresy. A liberal thinking predicated on the creation and nature with no religious divinity anchored in it or to be prayed to is not allowed, which means that the human being who has lapsed into a religious belief cannot either find or follow the way to the effective truth of the creational and therefore to the creationally given laws and recommendations. Fear and terror, as well as threats of divine punishment, bar the way of devout members of religions and sects to the real truth of the creation, and therefore also the way to the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, making this into a crime against God and the beliefs. The pernicious effects of Christianity and all other religions have been experienced by the human beings of Earth for millennia. However, in their religious and sectarian narrow-mindedness, they refuse to see and accept the terrible truth that religious and sectarian beliefs lead further and further from the effective truth. And with the steady drift away from the effective truth of the creational, and therefore also from creation itself, away from Earth, nature, and the universe, as well as from true life, love, peace, freedom, and harmony, more and more human beings are coming into the world. Overpopulation is being stoked up further and causing more and more destruction. Truly, the life of the human beings of Earth once blossomed at a time when everything was still largely in good order, when there were no religions, sects, false ideologies, and philosophies, and neither were there any politics or imperial machinations by human beings greedy for might, and no ausgeartet materialism either. Religions, sects, greed for might, materialism, and the trappings of imperialism destroyed any identity striving for a balance, as a result of which the human beings of Earth who once lived in friendship and association annihilated each other in endless struggles for might and religious wars, as well as through terror, feuds, hatred, jealousy, revenge, retaliation, murder, and manslaughter. One of the important reasons why religions and sects are wrong and false in their teachings concerns the indisputable fact that they all fundamentally misconceive the true nature of the creation and its laws and recommendations, and therefore also the nature of the life and death. Religions and sects teach their believers errors and confusions of the most evil form, and they throw human beings into terrible, irrational fear, anguish, and torture them in the most inhuman wise. However, this is an unpardonable crime, quite apart from the fact that practically all religions and sects are responsible for innumerable other terrible crimes of the widest variety of forms. Take, for example, the persecution and barbaric killing of human beings who believe and think otherwise, the forms of torture and tribunals, religious or sectarian raids, wars, encouragement to murder, mass suicides and material exploitation, as well as fanatical, religious, and sectarian terrorism, etc. Therefore, over the course of time in which religions, sects, ideologies, and philosophies have existed, criminal acts of the greatest extent and of the most extreme malice and Ausartung have been committed in their name and based on their beliefs, which have cost the lives of millions of human beings. Truthfully, None of the duplicitous religions, sects, philosophies, and ideologies are philanthropic in nature, even though their representatives and believers would maintain the opposite, which is a lie. They all talk duplicitously and act accordingly. In truth, they do not know any humane world because humanity is unbearable for them, so that they do not tolerate human beings who think and believe otherwise living next to them. And if they do, then it is only a pretense. Although all of them externally propose the ideal of the love for the next one, they are actually treading into the ground the real truth of love for the next one, as is given in the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of the life, and by the creational laws. This cynical and highly dangerous character of all religions, sects, and certain associated philosophies and ideologies, from which are excluded those ideologies and philosophies, which doubtless exist, that are actually good and humane, has since time immemorial led to intolerance and scrupulousness towards all things of the present existence, as well as to the contempt of the life, human beings, their rights, values, and needs with regard to consciousness-based evolution, as well as the ability to fulfill the creational laws and recommendations. The goblet of the truth, which corresponds to the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, makes it clear what the true face of the creation is with its laws and recommendations, giving rise to true love, peace, freedom, and harmony. And the teaching of the prophets, from which the goblet of the truth results, provides information about the creational laws and recommendations which appear in various forms and show that false religions, sects, philosophies, and ideologies amount to the most evil thing that could ever be concocted, come what may. However, this malignance has been practiced since time immemorial and remains so in the present day, determining the might of religions, sects, ideologies, philosophies, as well as politics, which down the ages have exerted huge constraints on human beings in order to control them. All in all, they have kept human beings in bondage to ensure their blind belief and obedience to the political, social, religious, sectarian, ideological, and philosophical pressure that is exerted on them. In the final analysis, however, this represents the downfall of humanity, together with the cultivation of overpopulation, because truly the human beings of Earth and their teeming masses are only now individually capable of using and living their truthfully and creation-conditioned knowledge of the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of the life, and therefore also of the creational laws and recommendations in absolute, consciousness-based freedom. Therefore, in order to avoid the downfall of humanity in the new millennium, in the third millennium, it is necessary to find the way back to creational truth and the creational laws and recommendations, to follow them, and therefore to make everything new with regard to the learning and knowledge of the effective plan of the creation. However, this can only happen if the human beings of Earth once again find and follow the roots of creational truth, and therefore the creational laws and recommendations. The new time, the new age of Aquarius, offers the opportunity of making a new start through the goblet of the truth, through the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, although this teaching, which has been kept in readiness since time immemorial by the true prophets, will by no means be exhausted, because beyond the known teaching it continues endlessly and will never run out for human beings. For the human beings of Earth, everything has developed into a pure, might-oriented thinking, intolerance and contempt for women, as well as enmity to nature, denial of the truth of the creational laws and recommendations, as well as to rampant overpopulation, which is leading to the destruction of Earth's climate and nature. Furthermore, the might-oriented thinking practiced by those in government and by the evil gestalt of religious belief of any kind has also resulted in a practically unoverlookable suppression of consciousness-based freedom. This manifests itself overall in an abysmal contempt for the natural, as well as creational laws and recommendations, as well as of the life and all existence. This means the human beings of Earth, when we take a look at the current situation, have driven themselves to the edge of a global catastrophe and are now well on the way to maneuvering themselves definitively into it if overpopulation is not finally stopped and population is reduced to a reasonable level by birth control. The effective truth stands for the life-giving energy and for life itself, as is predefined in the womb of creational laws and recommendations. Life-affirming creational energy links human beings directly to the laws and recommendations of the comprehensive creation, and its power fills the entire earth and universe. This is the same energy that wants to achieve harmonious concord with all life, with human beings, the planet, and the universe. In this form, the life-affirming creational energy is an extraordinarily important criterion for the nature of effective creational truth and life itself. However, the untruth, the lie, is powerless and an enemy of the creational, and has nothing to do with the womb of the truth. Consequently, the lie and untruth only lead a fictional life. However, those human beings who are dependent on this false life have removed themselves from the truth and from the care of creational laws and recommendations, as well as from a Mother Earth and the goodness of the universe. They are far from the truth, earth, and the creational, and are therefore beings of anti-truth. Therefore, they are also opponents of the creational warmth and care, because they can only assert themselves through evil, Goblet, lying and deception, as well as by exercising might, and through everything that is ausgeartet. All the catastrophes of all kinds triggered by the human beings of Earth, and, in the final analysis, also by the vast and irresponsibly cultivated overpopulation, are casting the world and the entire population of Earth into the abyss, from which it will be very difficult for them to work themselves out. Also, all the global catastrophes triggered and induced by earthly humanity have only happened because of violations of the principle of the truth, and therefore also of the creational laws and recommendations, instead of following the truly wise way of the effective truth and the teaching of the true prophets, which has been delivered as the spiritual teaching, i.e., as the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life from ancient times. And therefore this truth is also given in the book the entitled Goblet of the Truth, a first part of which, namely the teaching of Enoch, was also called the Cauldron of the Life by the Druid Prince Myrddin alias Merlin, and has nothing to do with the apparent grail of Christianity, which is only based on lies and deception, never existed, and therefore was not used by Joseph of Arimathea to collect the blood of Emmanuel, Jesus, at his crucifixion. The true Grail only existed as a holy place, and the composition was included in the Cauldron of the Life, a writing of the teaching of the true prophet Enoch from the series of 7 of Nochodemeon. The document was delivered to the Druid Myrddin, the Laughing One, later known more generally as Merlin, as a transcription of the Pleiera Caradwina, the triple goddess. Myrddin poured the transcription into the goblet, which was known as the Cauldron of the Life, and misused as the basis for fabricating the Grail through Christian falsifications, which by no means can be brought into connection with this Cauldron of the Life, because the Grail was a place with a spring, surrounded by trees and plants, where the Druids used to conduct their meditations. This Christian Grail falsification has been delivered down to the current time since its origination. However, once again in a further vast falsification which maintains that it was the goblet, a Grail of Emmanuel, Jesus, which Emmanuel and his disciples drank from during the Last Supper, and in which the blood of Emmanuel was collected by Joseph of Arimathea at the crucifixion. This enormous lie and falsification of the truth also applies to the so-called Holy Lance, with which it has been said that Emmanuel, Jesus, was stabbed in the side by a Roman soldier in order to find out if he was dead. Since then, this lance has been regarded as holy and carrying enormous might within it, capable of turning those greedy for might into rulers. Therefore, it has been highly honored. In truth, however, this lance never touched Emmanuel's side, because this is a Christian falsification manufactured only in the 8th century of the Common Era. Therefore, it was only made into a religious cult object because of the falsifications of Christian machinations, as is also the case with what is called the Turin Shroud, which is supposed to show a figure of Emmanuel, Jesus, but is actually the death mask of an Italian merchant called Caesar Canova and was manufactured by his brother Luciano Canova, who was involved in alchemy. Merlin attempted to pass on the teaching of Henoch through his influence on King Arthur, i.e. Artus, who was in his charge and his pupil, and amongst the heathen knights of the Round Table. But this resulted in a miserable failure because the fierce clan leader Artus and his heathen knights could not come to terms with the teaching. Therefore, Artus seized the sealed cauldron of the life and cast it into the sea with his own hands. Christianity has falsified the actual picture of the Grail, i.e., the picture of the holy Celtic meditation site of the Druids, out of recognition. And the banal reason for doing this was the cowardly fear felt by Christian priests and believers in the face of the teachings of Celtic philosophy of belief. Over 2 millennia, the whole thing has plunged millions upon millions of believers into a boundless loss of orientation in terms of knowledge and truth, resulting not only in many wars, Ausartungen, and evil of all kinds, but also destroying millions of human lives, in many cases due to the delusion, the lies and the falsifications of Christianity and all other religions and sects. All this taken together also resulted in a huge and deeply rooted life angst that has been increased by the terrible obsessions related to the fear of death that have been brought about by Christianity and the other religions. The most insane of all religions is Christianity, which goes so far as to claim that what it describes as the Son of God, Jesus, will at some time be bodily reborn. In early Christianity, it was even claimed that this would take place very soon after Jesus' death, which would apparently also have an impact on the dead who had believed in him. For this reason, in antiquity, thousands upon thousands of rotting corpses were actually hoarded in the living areas of houses, which, as could be expected, led to catastrophic plagues, as is known from ancient Rome in particular. Later, Christian theologians proclaimed the second coming of Christ and the resurrection of the dead on doomsday at the end of time, and thereby shifted the fulfillment of the entire deception and absurdity to some imaginary day, which will never come. However, this in turn had the effect that instead of hoarding corpses, other insane and abnormal aberrations came about, such as the imbecilic and widespread cult of relics, which swamps the whole of Christianity down to this day, as it does other religions and sections. This involves not only overwhelming the believers with apparently genuine, but in fact false, utensils of human beings who have been elevated to the status of founders of the religion, but also with purported body parts of obscure saints and martyrs. This terrible state of affairs is also exacerbated by channelers who, claiming to be chosen ones, talk to Christ, God, Mary the mother of Jesus, Joseph the father of Jesus, Pater Pio, or any other dead saints and the like, claiming to be in contact with them and receiving messages. The entire imbecilic procedure is promoted further by the so-called hallowed ones, and chastened ones who appeared and filled the heads of the believers full to the brim with nonsense by calling forth stigmata, i.e., the 5 wounds of Christ on their bodies, as a result of their broken psyche or straightforward self-mutilation. This is, however, also the case with regard to apparent castings out of devils and demons, i.e., evocations of the devil, i.e., exorcism by Catholic priests and other believers in devils and demons, as a result of which human beings with very serious psychical injuries and psychical physical states of agitation were often maltreated, even unto death. Christianity also intervened in life after death, as a result of which believers have lapsed into horrendous obsessions ever since the existence of the Catholic Church. This involves a strict denial of the rebirth of the spirit form, and representing the other world as a kind of limbo named purgatory and as the actual hell. In opposition to this, heaven was invented with, apparently, a God in residence to welcome all those into his kingdom who piously danced according to his tune. And with regard to this psychotic fantasy, the Christian religion, as well as sects and certain other religions, maintain that heaven is something like the ultimate destination of human life. However, anyone who fundamentally sins against the Christian belief and everything connected with it would be doomed to an eternity in hell, to undergo endless and terrible agonies of torture there. On the other hand, all human beings who die, except for the saints, are not able to enter heaven directly, because each must first be purified in purgatory, a process taking millions of years, in order to be refined through agonies less intense than those of hell, in order to become worthy for heaven and to obtain heavenly purity. If one takes a look at this entire Christian religious nonsense, it is apparent that the entire thing reveals itself to be nothing more than an extraordinarily underdeveloped consciousness attitude, something which only a sick human brain could have developed. Any human being who looks at the relevant religious writings of Christianity and of the other religions and sects having an equivalent or similar stance will undoubtedly recognize, providing he or she bears clear rationality and intellect and is capable of understanding that the authors and proponents of all this senselessness are and were out-and-out psychopaths who transfer their own irrational fears and delusions into their pathologically dumb and primitive, wrong, idiotic, and false teachings that are not logically followable. Seen in their entirety in this wise, the religious and sectarian teachings of the life and of the last things of all existence are not only one great erroneous assumption, but also an all-embracing, evil lie that is leading humanity into confusion, has resulted in innumerable human beings straying into confusion and far from truth, vegetating in their unknowledge of untruth. This is because the false teachings of religions and sects, of philosophies and ideologies have given them a completely incorrect and fearful attitude to life and the effective truth, as well as to the real creational laws and recommendations. And thus all religions and sects, all philosophies and ideologies, as well as all human beings who depend on them have simply failed to understand the truthful sense of the truth. All you human beings of sound rationality and good intentions are called upon to face the fundamental conflict between good and evil as well as the ausgeartet, and to place yourselves on the side of the positive, progress, and therefore of the good and the life. And all you human beings of earth who have the courage to fight against evil, negativity, and the ausgeartet must provide help through your sharp rationality and your intellect, through love, peace, freedom, and harmony, and only use these as weapons. Solely through these weapons will you prevail against all the rife contempt for humankind and destructive madness that is hostile towards life, as is held by all those human beings of earth who have lapsed into evil, Goblet, materialism, capitalism, as well as ausgeartet and inhumane things. Resist all Ausartungen that are threatening life and all existence, and resist everything evil today, in the present and in every future, because only by doing so will you be able to bring about a healthy developmental change in all regards. Never bow down to evil, but undertake everything in kind-heartedness, righteousness, fairness, and everything permitted in accordance with the creational laws and recommendations and their truth, so that you will be capable of finally defeating the negative and evil principle. Do it always in respect and honor for the life, even if you suffer terrible setbacks. Hold firm to your knowledge about the effective truth of the validity of the creational laws and recommendations, which teach love, peace, freedom, and harmony, so that you shall live with them. Fight for this truth, just like all the true prophets of all times, and like all those human beings who have done this over millennia for the truth and for life, and who also do it today and will do it tomorrow and in every future, even if the successes were or are only slight. But constant dripping wears the stone, as has been the motto for this since time immemorial. Over the course of time, humanity and democratic societies have been achieved and implemented through the peaceful struggle of human beings in accordance with rationality and truth, just as many human rights and other values have been. These are palpable and recognizable results by human beings who have fought for them for millennia and continue to do so. And if earthly humanity is currently standing as if in mockery close to the abyss of the destruction of all things, then it is precisely in this current epoch that the opportunity for radical change and victory in the struggle presents itself, although this will require the human beings of earth finally to decide for the good, the positive, for the things that make life worth living and for life itself. The truth is that the third millennium presents a new opportunity in the firmament of fate that will cast out the darkness of past millennia of war and can bathe the future in a brilliant light. To achieve this, it is only necessary to seize the opportunity to heed the teaching of the prophets, to live according to the goblet of the truth, which even the Celtic Druids called the goblet of the life and cauldron of the life. You, human beings of Earth, find a way to a positive and life-affirming consciousness in which you will finally truly live your life and start to form your future in love, peace, wisdom, freedom, and harmony. Because in spite of the threatening disaster, you have the possibility and opportunity to do so. The universe itself, in an interaction with your Earth, gives you the impulse for reorientation. And through this, you can find a loving balance in the human sphere that will also lead you to equality and equal rights in the mutual complementation of man and woman. And if you use the opportunity that has been given to you in all things, then you will once more achieve the entire prosperity of the life in the new age of Aquarius and in the third millennium, after having missed it for very long. For millennia, you have been striving for a development of harmony, love, peace, freedom, and dwelling together in concord, and all of these things are ideally suited to bringing regulation to all things on earth. And if you follow this compulsion laid down by the laws of the creation, then you will step out of the darkness of Ausartung and into an unparalleled, brighter era. However, bear in mind that this will only happen if you are ready to accept the great gift offered to you by your Earth, the entire universe, and the creational laws and recommendations. You yourselves bear witness to your bright future. But all of you, you human beings of Earth, you must do your part in this and use your own means of love, peace, harmony, and freedom to fight for everything in order to break out of the darkness. However, you will only be able to do this if the recognition awakes in you of everything that the creational laws and recommendations have to offer you, and if you learn and follow these, as you have been taught by the goblet of the truth, and the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, as has been given since time immemorial by the true prophets. If you human beings of Earth search for the creational laws and recommendations that form creational harmony and goodness, with intellect and rationality, and with your intuition, you will find them everywhere. You will recognize and understand them at every turn, whether in the bubbling of a spring, in the face of a human being, in a flower, in the sounds of the forest or the sea, in the glinting of the sun, the twinkling of the stars, in the eyes of an animal, or in any other things that exist. Everywhere. And if you human beings of Earth make yourselves once again capable of linking this new and yet primeval truth in all forms with all real forms of the life, then you will be able to tread a holistic way in the consciousness of the truth. Look to the future with this in mind and with great courage, and in spite of the terrible setbacks in the past, the present, and the future to come. If you follow the instruction for your change to the good and the positive, then you can seize the opportunity for a new start and connect it to the requirements of a life. And in this wise, you will solve many of humanity's current problems once and for all, and indeed in a peaceful, harmonious, and constructive wise. Heal yourselves and your world. Then you will find your deliverance in the form of the rebirth of your sound and reasonable consciousness. Heal yourselves, you human beings of Earth, you women and men, because then the message of love, freedom, and harmony, as well as of peace and living together in harmony, will no longer remain a great and auspicious dream for you, but will become truth and reality. Then, namely, it will come about for you that you will bring forth new and good deeds, thoughts and feelings, as well as endlessly rich life experiences, turning your life into true happiness. Consider that the weaker all the evil, negative, and ausgeartet things become in you, the more profound will be the correction and resolution of the fatal incorrect developments in your thoughts and feelings, as well as in your actions and behavior, and they will cease to determine your lives and your evil destinies. Admittedly, it is still the case that very many of you human beings of Earth who wish to follow the truth of creational laws and recommendations will still have to overcome very many and very significant obstacles. However, Remember that all true prophets had to face and overcome challenges of this kind, and as they were able to do, so then it is also possible for you, providing you have the volition to do so. Semyazi Silver Star Center, August 10th, 2008, 1:17 a.m. Billy.